Hey guys, I'm really excited to launch this week's episode with Kevin Levers. Kevin is a pharmacist with over 35 years of experience in both conventional and natural pharmaceutical industries. We are so fortunate to hear from him and his personal and professional journey into creating the Naked Pharmacy. The Naked Pharmacy is an organisation he built that sells natural supplements with the best quality and evidence-based practice behind his products. You are so fortunate to listen to this episode because you are going to receive a 20% discount on his website and all his products using the code PD20. I hope you guys enjoy the episode. Welcome to Pharmacist Diaries, first of all, Kevin, and thank you for making the time to come on the podcast today.
Absolute pleasure. Really looking forward to chatting all about different elements of pharmacy. We're both kind of passionate about what pharmacy and being a pharmacist can do in the world and for ourselves. So, looking forward to having a good discussion.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about why you became a pharmacist in the first place.
I always had a passion for health, even as a very young child. I was massively into science at school. And I just instinctively knew that I was going to get into a career relating to healthcare. Wasn't quite sure what it was going to be. I looked at forensic science for a bit. I liked the idea of being on a journey where you don't really know where the outcome is. That kind of sense of adventure, that sense of discovery, was always fascinating to me. And so even to the point where actually I didn't really want to go to college. I had a drive to go to work, and I don't know where that came from. But so instead of going to college after doing my O levels, GCSEs now, I started writing and applying for jobs, and one of those jobs was in Boots Healthcare. They had a research division, chemistry and biology. I wrote to both, and as luck would have it, I got an interview, a series of interviews. I had 3, I think, in all before I actually went into research chemistry. I was interviewed by the guy that discovered ibuprofen. So that was really fascinating experience. And actually, one that's more fascinating as I get older, looking back at that experience as a 16-year-old. Actually, I probably was 15 at the time, being asked the chemistry questions by a god of chemistry. And at the time, my view was that this was amazing. He was a pioneer of drug discovery, and drug discovery was the answer to all our problems. And I think as my career's progressed, I think I've gone through a learning cycle. Is that yes, it's an answer to some of the problems. But we have to look wider. We have to look deeper. I think that. So go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say that's really interesting. I was sorry to butt in.
No problem.
I was going to say that not trying to show your age or how long ago you qualified as a pharmacist, but what was your perception of what pharmacists were able to do in terms of a career when you were 15 or 16 years old?
I don't think I had a perception of pharmacy at that point in time. I think that came later because Boots Pharmaceuticals paid for my night school. So I was a day and 2 nights, but in reality it was more like a day and 5 nights a week studying. And then the other 4 days I would work. And in my second year of the ONC, which is sort of a part-time qualification, there was a pharmacist doing a course on pharmacy and pharmaceuticals, and it really gave me a different insight. So that was the first time I sort of came across a pharmacist, and he was a regular lecturer at the college we were going to, and it really made me think long and hard. So then I started looking into pharmacy and what pharmacists do, and the one thing that really grabbed me was the fact that it had a very broad-based education and experience. And I really like that because although I was in chemistry for 4 years with the research department, that there was a missing component of that. I think the biology and the biochemical pathways, all of those processes interlinked as far as I was concerned. So this was the first time I saw it presented in a way that I felt that was more holistic. So I think that really came when I was I was probably 18 at the time. And then I went on to do a HNC at Nottingham Trent University, which again was more chemistry based. But by that point, I think I'd been converted. So I was having conversations in the lift at work because we had pharmacists in the drug metabolism unit that I kept asking questions about, what the course was like, what you could do as a pharmacist career-wise. So I think I made a decision quite quickly as soon as I had those lectures. So it just shows you how a lecturer can influence and inspire.
Absolutely. That sounds really exciting. So what was it like in university for you? What were you sort of passionate about in terms of your learning experience?
So I between 16 and 20, I was at Boots Pharmaceuticals. So that was a incredible experience as a young first working experience, I suppose, working for these PhDs, postdoc chemists, and looking at my department was anti-inflammatories and anti-rheumatics. My first experience at university, I went to Bath University, was that I loved it. I loved all the different elements of the education. There were some areas that I was a little bit frustrated about because, we spent like a year and a half, 2 years on titrations, for instance, in chemistry. When having worked in a chemistry department, I knew that nobody ever used titrations anymore. We use HPLC. So I felt that some of the lectures and the subjects were behind the reality, and that frustrated me a lot, if I'm honest. But there were lots of elements of the course that I loved. The actual practice of pharmacy, some of the case studies. We had a medical doctor come in with case studies, and I found that really fascinating. Seeing patients explain their journey, their healthcare journey, with the medical insight from a doctor's perspective. We didn't really have a pharmacist perspective on those case studies, so that was interesting. And I think that for me was it. Is that journey? I said, well, okay, how do we improve that journey from a patient's perspective? And then as time went by, when I graduated, I had a year in hospital pharmacy and a year in retail pharmacy. I could see where the drugs really were important in a hospital setting, but I saw a lot of polypharmacy in the retail setting that really disturbed me and worried me about patients coming back and having more and more prescriptions rather than. It didn't seem to me as if they were getting better, whereas you could see the improvements acutely in a hospital setting. They come in and have their operation and they recover. But I was concerned that there were lots of missing elements to a person's recovery that weren't making sense in a retail pharmacy setting. I love having conversations with customers. I love working with colleagues within the pharmacy, having discussions about how we can improve things, and I think those conversations with customers about their various problems, their challenges, did make a difference. But I think I became more and more frustrated that I wasn't making a big enough difference in terms of recovery.
Yeah, so you're already at quite an early age looking at the bigger picture in terms of, I guess, what the patient experiences now and polypharmacy and preventing those problems from a holistic perspective and looking at kind of medication prevention and improving people's health and well-being.
Yeah, I think that you can't. I mean, even in those days, I think if you start talking about mind and body medicine, I think people just look at you as if you had landed from a different planet and that you weren't being scientific, you weren't being evidence based, and therefore there was a conflict there. And yet now, even for the last 5-10 years, we talk about mind body medicine, we know that it's based in proper research, and we know that the influence of the two connection of it's becoming stronger, isn't it? Because now we understand the vagal nerve connection between the gut and the brain, how the gut becomes really fundamental to the process of health, and how it drives mental health problems. Just because the gut's disturbed, the brain's disturbed, and you don't sleep, you're anxious, you're feeling low, and and all of those wider perspectives, I think, weren't there 30 odd years ago when I was moving into practice, and I think that it's evolving at such a rate. My concern is that we have an infrastructure now that is really set in the past, and it really needs to be reset right from its grassroots level, right into the heart of the government healthcare, National Healthcare Service, the way we license drug, the infrastructure for and the process for licensing new treatments, whether they're conventional or natural. I think the whole infrastructure is geared towards the past, just in the same way that I think we're coming to an end of single chemical entities for treatment of disease, because just the mere fact is that most of those chemical entities have been synthesized already, and the molecules are getting bigger and bigger and more complex and more expensive to synthesize. And now we're obviously moving into more genetic kind of processes for producing drugs and researching drugs. But we're still in that same pyramid structure for licensing that actually restricts it down to one component. If I look at the herbal products, the botanical products that I'm promoting and recommending in an integrated way, actually most of those have got multi-components. You perhaps got 5, 6 key compounds within those botanical mixes that are important, and it's very difficult to license those within the system, so they end up working as a sort of separate entity globally. I think this is the case. They run privately, they run alongside an integrated healthcare system, which is actually not fully integrated. It's getting better, but I think that all has to change. And I think pharmacists are ideally placed to make those changes, but we have to start start analysing and challenging a lot more. I think critical thinking is really fundamental. I think that we're quite a conservative bunch at pharmacists per se, and I think we're not actually encouraged to critically think about the processes that we're endorsing. We're in the system, so we have to challenge the system. What's right and what's wrong, what works and what doesn't, what's right for us to move forward. And as I said to you before, we started today, the fact that we're shutting down hundreds of pharmacies in the UK means that the system, the commercial system, the way it's integrated with the health service, A, is not being valued enough, but B, it's not working. Are we valuing our own services sufficiently that we're getting paid, and the businesses are being remunerated in a way that makes this work going forward? And the reality is it's not at the moment. And as you said, that there are lots of pharmacists leaving the profession because they're frustrated, and rightly so. Where are these pharmacists, from the stores that are being shut down? Where are they going? Are they retiring? All that experience is being lost. And somewhere somebody's got to start changing the way we perceive pharmacists, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And these discussions and even this kind of like problem solving and critical thinking and critical analysis, I feel needs to start from the university level, including natural medicine as well. I've been banging on about this for a long time. It's like you qualify as a pharmacist, you go and work in a community pharmacy, but you learn more about vitamins in the job rather than at an early stage. Like it's not a massive component of the pharmacy degree from an undergraduate perspective. So if you're going into community pharmacy, you could be providing a lot of support to the community in terms of health prevention, or diseases that can be treated naturally. But then a lot of pharmacists, even when I started in community pharmacy out of interest, I did a few little short courses or worked in community pharmacies where there was an experienced pharmacist who enjoyed or was passionate about natural medicine. So I did learn a lot on the go, but there isn't much incorporated into the university degree yet as to supporting this element of pharmacy, which I think is kind of the way forward in terms of health prevention.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about, I was doing some research the other day in terms of the first pharmacies in the UK and where they were founded, and in Europe. I mean, I think it was 700 AD that was the earliest one in Europe. I think UK is more like 1700s, and obviously Boots Pharmacy itself, I think, was early 1900s. And in those days, there weren't pharmaceutical drugs available, and they were all herbalists. I mean, admittedly, some of those herbal products were probably, well, certainly not evidence based, and probably some concerning elements to their manufacture. Whereas I think now generally herbal products are made much more stringently, and actually we are focusing on evidence based, and the Naked Pharmacy was set up for that reason. Is what are the evidence bases for these products, and we'll only stock ones that have gone through an RCT, properly controlled, properly placebo, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, with the p-values less than 0.05. So all those just because it's natural doesn't mean to say that you have to throw out the training that we've had, the important training. And we do a lot of auditing of suppliers, GMP audits, quality processes. We recruit 4 pharmacists here within this business, and we don't take a penny from the NHS. We're independently funded. And I'm really proud of that in terms of the service we provide to customers, as well as we train other pharmacists as well. That's certainly an area that I want to grow, both here and overseas. So I think that we need to open our eyes. There was a lot of, when I first started way back, early 90s, I worked for a Swiss herbal company, and I think some of my colleagues thought I'd gone mad. But actually, it was a Swiss pharmaceutical company, and it had licensed herbals, just like there are licensed meds. I mean, admittedly, the clinical trials were not as large as some of the prescription meds, but they were there around in the early 90s, and I think that the attitude has changed. And so, if you go to France, you will always have if you have an antibiotic course, you'll always have a probiotic alongside. So why wouldn't you do that? It's wiping out the gut flora as well as the bad stuff. So why wouldn't you replenish the gut with probiotics just to compensate for the antibiotic? So we're not.
It sounds so obvious. It sounds
Yeah.
so obvious when you say it out loud.
Yeah, and there's a lot of common sense stuff that I think as time went by, I started challenging myself. So actually, if you've got diarrhea, why are you blocking up the system with loperamide? Actually, isn't it better to kind of test the stool to make sure there's nothing serious in there and treat it in a targeted way, rather than going through several prescriptions for loperamide? And actually, isn't that the body's way of trying to get rid of the bug that's causing the problem in the first place? So yes, I mean, it might be a short-term thing, but as a long-term treatment for that condition, it didn't make any sense. It wasn't logical. And then we started moving away from that into more rehydration with, the sachets and the minerals to try and replace what's been lost. So I think things are moving, but they don't tend to move fast enough. And you're right, I think that has to start at the universities in terms of the way that pharmacists are being trained and supported. But if there's one take home, I would say, and again, we discussed this beforehand, was that don't just limit yourself to the traditional roles, is that you can invent your own role in pharmacy. And there are a lot of companies out there that need your broad-based skills. I mean, I'm testimony to it. I mean, after I left Weleda in 2004, I was their chief pharmacist, and covered a lot of different work. It was fascinating stuff, but I was spending too much time doing paperwork and not enough time innovating. So I set up a R&D consultancy called Lotus Health, and I had 6 pharmacists working with me on projects around the world. And we built factories, we audited factories, we set up supply chains, we developed products that were completely innovative, very strong beetroot extracts for lowering blood pressure, and it does work. And that was researched alongside William Harvey Research Institute, Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and we developed a treatment for problem skin using a broccoli substrate. It's really interesting to note that, when I checked this out last time, probably the percentages have changed a bit, but 10, 15 years ago, I think something like 50% of the prescribed medicines were discovered from plants. So actually, pharmacy has come from arisen from botanicals, and evolved from it. So we shouldn't just throw it away. We should integrate it. That's my passion, if you like.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. I'm going to take you kind of 2 steps back. When you worked for the Swiss pharmaceutical company, what was your role there as a pharmacist? And I guess tell us a little bit about what you learned from that experience and how it applies to what you do today.
The Weleda period for me was quite important because it was a big transition point. I just finished working for Upjohn in quality control, quality assurance, mainly on injectables, painkillers, diamorphine, morphine injectables, and I'd come back to the UK. I was overseas with Upjohn, and the first job that came up was with Weleda, and I thought, well, this is really interesting. I'll do 2 years, and then I'll move back into mainstream pharmaceuticals. And 11 years later, I was still there because I was learning. It was a massive growth spurt in terms of learning for me. We had a farm on site, so we had, I can't remember how many acres it was, but it was quite a large farm. And if we couldn't grow it on site in Derbyshire, we grew it in Scotland or we grew it in Europe because it was linked to I think there's something like 35 different Weleda sites around the world. So the concept of plant to product was quite transforming, because before that, a raw material was a synthetic powder that you either formulated in the lab or it arrived in a box, and it was a white powder that you analysed. It was 99.9% pure, whatever component. So that was really interesting, and the fact that it had season to season variation. So sometimes the bioactives within the plant, would sometimes double depending on the growing season. So that was really fascinating. We tried to grow arnica, for instance, which is an anti-inflammatory, in Derbyshire. When it likes elevated, it likes to be quite high above sea level, and we had been growing it in Scotland, and when we tested it, had virtually no bioactive in there whatsoever. So there was stuff like that happening all the time. Wow, that's amazing, that's incredible. And how to take those plants, how to extract them using different methods, more traditional perhaps, less solvent based. We did use a solvent. It was normally grain alcohol and water. Just looking at, because we had a registered pharmacy on site, and we had 2 or 3 pharmacists kind of managing the customer side, we also saw the impact for patients. So what was surprising me was how powerful these products were in terms of the end effect. And that was quite challenging, because I think I had a fairly neutral stance in terms of botanicals before I started. I went there because it was head of manufacturing, and I thought this is going to be really interesting. And I didn't expect to see such profound and quick improvements based on the drugs. And so they were often standardized in terms of minimum levels of bioactives. And that was really that was really important to me, because how it linked to the research and how it linked to my training. So, just because it's a natural doesn't mean to say that, you can just create an extract that's not standardized, hasn't been tested for its bioactives, and it doesn't have a minimum level. So I saw that was really important, and that stayed with me the whole time, is that importance of supply chain, where it's grown, when it's grown and harvested, how it's extracted, how it's tested, and what you're testing for. So having moved into the sort of natural sector through Weleda and since, because all my projects, even as a consultant, were all naturals or nutraceuticals, you can see a lot of companies, it's a bit like the Wild West, unfortunately, in the natural sector. You've got the good and then the bad and the cowboys. And a lot of the companies are basically selling subtherapeutic doses of bioactives, and it's like chipping off a portion of your ibuprofen or aspirin tablet and expecting it to work as an anti-inflammatory. And the same principle applies. So that's one of the ways I differentiate between a good and a not so good supplement. So the takeouts for me was passion from Weleda. I was hooked in terms of the sector and what it could do. I felt that there was a much wider element to what I was doing at Weleda, because we would tend to be focused on specific minerals, and minerals perhaps you might find in a codex and an old-fashioned pharmacopoeia, antimony, bismuth, and the like. We were making those more traditional products externally and internally, and herbal botanicals, so ones that would be more recognised as a herbal medicine rather than a food. Since when I left Weleda in 2004, I really started to move into food science, because what was fascinating me then was the fact that, well, if you can take certain foods that perhaps you wouldn't consume in large amounts, would they behave like medicines without the side effects? So really the time at Weleda, the 11 years at Weleda, facilitated my education in manufacturing, quality control, sourcing, supply chain, and how that interfaced with the customer or the patient. When I left Weleda in 2004, I was really starting to look wider and think, well, actually, can foods do the same thing if you concentrate them? So a classic example of that would be saffron. Obviously, you use saffron in your cooking. You might use one or two strands of the spice or the powder, depending on how you're using it. But if you concentrate saffron to a higher dose and standardize it with the 3 active bioactives in there, it's very good for mood balancing. It's very good for reducing anxiety. It's very good for sleep. And these are based on randomized controlled trials. So actually, if you're having issues with benzodiazepines, if you're having issues with overprescription of antidepressants, why not use this as a softer interface before you get to that point? And my experience is with the use of this over probably now 7 years within this business, because that was one of our first products, Saffron, where saffron is its core ingredient. The impact it's having on people's lives are profound, and it doesn't have side effects, doesn't interact. Obviously, we're cautious with pregnancy and breastfeeding because of the lack of data. But why not use that as an integrated approach? It's different to general cooking because of the dose, but it works and it's safe and it's effective and it's very fast acting. Within 3 or 4 days, you're seeing a big difference in terms of our clients. And that reflects with the RCT data that we've got already, that's already published out there.
That's fascinating. What an interesting experience for you. And it's very clear that your background has kind of led you to where you are, which is really interesting from a career perspective. I guess tell us a little bit about your initial thought processes when developing the idea for Naked Pharmacy.
I think for me, it was a more of a legacy product or project, because I always wanted to make a difference to people's lives, and it felt a lot more personal for me in terms of developing the company. I didn't want it to be a separate nutrition company without. I'm a pharmacist. I've been brought up through the pharmaceutical industry. I'm really proud of that. I'm constantly amazed by my colleagues in terms of their ability, their ability to develop in all sorts of different directions, and the impact they have on people's lives every day. I just think for me, this was my channel for getting a service out there that was free, openly available to everyone, whether it's through social media channels, through telephone, through emails. I mean, our pharmacist Dimple, I don't know, I think she said something like 80 emails this morning, various different queries, and it might be simple: how do I treat my cold naturally? To I'm taking this prescription, can I take this alongside safely? And I love the fact that we're making those simple differences to people's lives, and there's no doubt that it's a necessary service, that there's a demand out there, and I suspect that demand is going to get more and more, because how do you get to speak to a pharmacist these days with pharmacies shutting down? How do you get to speak and get some advice that's personal to you? And we've got a range of products, both our own and bought-in products that we believe in, that's got a good evidence base, and that those will grow. I think we'll end up with about 200, and our services will grow around that in terms of testing services. I believe in marker testing, and I think people, if they understand what these markers mean, then they can actually track improvements in terms of their health. And if they can see an improvement, they can realise that they are having an impact. And I think that's another take home from my journey, which is actually we need to empower people to understand that they are in charge here. And I think there's been this thing that members of the public, people out there, have to defer to the medics and the pharmacists, and that everything we say is go. Actually, we are in a phase where we should be facilitating, not dictating. So empower people with the right information, the evidence-based information, absolutely, and give them choices and help them find the right choices for them. Don't push it down their throats. You have to have this. Actually, we often will say, well, there's a natural and there's a conventional choice here. You can take the two side by side, or you can take one at a time. And I always say, if it's working for you, great. If it's not, then try something different. And that applies to the natural sector as well. So for me, I set the Naked Pharmacy up because I wanted something where I wanted a hub where people could feel they belonged and trusted. I wanted a hub that created a much more of a community feel about it. And we're building that slowly but surely. I think we're up to about 60,000 in the UK alone. As I say, we've got 4 pharmacists working on staff, and they're all different personalities, all from different backgrounds. And I think that mix is really important as well, because I'll approach things differently to Dimple and Emma. We'll have our core training, but we approach things differently, and that's important as well. So the service side is really important. The products that have the biggest impact is really fundamental. I had when we first launched, I self-funded this for 3 years, and it's not for the faint-hearted. And I had a very lucrative, business as a consultant and consultancy. And so, you feel a bit nervous about going into that territory when you're taking that step. And I was older. So you say, well, you're more experienced. But actually, I had to learn a whole new set of skills in my 40s and 50s that I hadn't got. So from the entrepreneurial point of view, I think those skills came later. They weren't there when I was 16. They weren't there when I was in my 20s. They came later. So I suppose that comes with confidence. But as that evolved, you take those steps forward, and I got into this space where we had two products: the Saffron for mental health, and we had a product for cholesterol, which is based on an Italian fruit, bergamot fruit. And again, it had some really good data, proper randomized controlled trials. There was a brilliant study in the International Journal of Cardiology where it was showing how it could be integrated alongside a statin to improve outcomes and reduce dose of statin. So that to me was perfect. So I went out with these two products, and within probably 2 months, I think I had two letters which said to me I'm on the right track. And one was from a practitioner saying his patient, having been agoraphobic for years, suddenly, for some bizarre reason, had taken the Saffron and within a few weeks had started cycling to his mother's house every day. And then a few months later, he was out and about. He said that it just seemed to have kind of triggered something and a rebalance. Maybe he felt that he was in charge of his own symptoms for a short period of time. And eventually he kept writing to me and said, well, he's now set up his own business. He's got his life back on track. And so you could argue that was a spontaneous remission, nothing to do with the Saffron, anecdotal. But to me, that was a sense that, well, actually, this is what it can do. As part of the clinical trials sort of framework that we designed and formulated the product, it shows it works. And we had case after case after case. And then the second letter that really had a big impact on me was from the wife of a customer who was on a lot of painkillers. He was depressed because he wasn't working. Very creative guy. He'd worked in the film industry, and he wasn't exercising. His life, health wise, had taken a spiral, and it impacted on so many different things. And so he'd taken the Saffron, and he'd taken a lot of high dose turmeric for his pain. And he said he'd come off all his painkillers. His depression had lifted. He said he was sleeping better. He wasn't so anxious, and he was back at work, working on creatives for the film industry. And his wife said, well, thank you so much, because I've got my husband back. That to me was everything, because it's, no matter what pain you go through, just to sort of see that you are seeing that impact on people's lives. And that's continued to this date. So, we're 7 years old now. We're launching into the US, we're launching into Asia. We've got some connections with practitioners in the Middle East. So I'm really excited about what this can do in terms of people's lives, and a sense of where people can come and share stories and experiences and get advice. Because, we've all been through a lot of stuff recently, with COVID, et cetera. And I think we're looking for solutions, and that's what we're all about, trying to find natural solutions. And if that also includes exercise, that also includes dietary approaches, we'll bring in those bits of advice just to make the difference.
Wow, what an interesting experience, and how rewarding to hear all of that feedback. I mean, if it was an organization where you were selling the products through your website, which you are obviously, but you weren't having those individual interactions with a customer, you wouldn't be getting that feedback from them as to the impact it's making on their lives, which is driving you to continue to do what you do.
Yeah.
And just making your job extremely enjoyable, because you're seeing how much support that these products are actually providing to people's lives. And some of those stories are incredible. Tell us a little bit about how that works in terms of the virtual setup and what pharmacists, the support pharmacists you have, are actually doing on their day to day.
So we handle queries coming through social. If we try to bring those off, it might be a surface skim on the social, just asking for help. We'll take those off privately for a more in-depth discussion, or the pharmacist will. Obviously, we get a lot of emails, sometimes maybe 120, 115 a day. And so we deal with those individually. And then we get a lot of calls. I think it goes through phases with telephone. Sometimes it gets very busy, and sometimes it'll be a bit quieter and it goes to email, or sometimes it will shift to social. So I think you've got to try and meet people where they are in their lives. And generally people are very busy these days. They've got, families have got both parents at work, and they've got, kids or whatever. There's a lot of complications, bless you. So I think people, we have to meet people where they're at. So we try and make it as convenient as possible and simple as possible. But if they wanted a more, in-depth sort of discussion, then we're happy to provide that. And just like a normal pharmacy, we'll signpost to where they need to go if they need sort of additional help. And I think that's also quite important to know where our boundary is, where our skill mix stops, and they need to go back. And we'll always be respectful of the relationship between the GP and the patient. We'll never get in between that. So we'll often refer back to the GP or private practitioner where necessary.
Interesting. And I mean, you've talked about the organization, growing and expanding out to different countries, and I assume your pharmacy team will slowly keep growing. What type of pharmacists are you hiring in terms of what do you look out for in terms of skill set and experience when you are hiring pharmacists into the team?
It's a really interesting, important question. Thank you. I've changed my attitude towards recruitment, and it applies to non-pharmacists as well, which is I'm less interested in experience. I'm more interested in state of mind and an attitude. And I think the flexibility and an inquiring and flexible mind is far more important to a 30-year impressive CV. Obviously that's important and that's quite useful. That goes on without saying. We check those out, but and the ability to fit in with other people and how they are with customers. Because I think, as a general rule, we've had some amazing pharmacists come through the door with us, and sometimes we had an amazing hospital pharmacist that had been in hospital pharmacy for a long time, wanted to change, and she was with us for a few years, and amazing dynamic person, great with customers, great with the challenges that came along that sometimes she had no training for whatsoever. And in the end, she's retired from pharmacy. So we lost her, unfortunately. But so as a classic example, somebody with a lot of experience, but had the flexibility of mind and the enjoyment of something different coming through every day. Some pharmacists are not comfortable with that, and that's fine. That means it's probably not for them, because what we get through the door every day is not. We have standard operating procedures, but actually, you almost have to create a new one each time, because everybody's health journey is different. And yes, you can standardize that to a certain extent, but you also have to try and understand what the dynamics are that are driving those problems. And sometimes those dynamics are social, or a life event that happened that really challenged them. And so then a decision has to be taken, well, actually, how much can I help here, and how much do we need to refer on? So in terms of recruitment, I think attitude of mind and ability to work with others, personality, is really important. And I see some amazing people coming through university, but I also see the problem that I saw a long time ago, 30 years ago, is that kind of linear approach and narrow approach. This is what I do, and this is how I'm going to do it. Instead of actually thinking, well, actually, maybe we can evolve this a little bit. And I think if pharmacists can do that, learn how, and the universities can encourage them to do that as part of their profession, then I think that the demand for pharmacists within industry, it doesn't necessarily have to be pharmaceuticals, will get wider because their ability to apply what they've learned to, health metrics and digital health is growing at such a speed now. And I'm not just, I don't know, you'll probably know better than me about how much that is taught within the university. So are we really looking at that as an option? Are pharmacists coming through the profession actually understanding that that's available to them? They're in a perfect position.
No, that's a really good topic of conversation. And actually, I was going to bring up a point about, empowering people to take ownership of their health, and a comment that you had made a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
When it comes to the university setup and the curriculum, there's so much to include from a basic point of view that every hour is literally packed. And now we've got this GPHC and kind of the government drive to get everyone to be a prescriber at the end of their university degree, which is going to be 2026. We need to implement this. And I went back to work from maternity leave last week. So I've had 6 months off. I've got a new baby. I've returned to work a little bit early, and my first week back, I have a meeting, and these discussions on how to incorporate more placements and more time in real live pharmacy practice areas, whether it's GP, community, hospital. Fitting those hours in is a massive challenge, on top of the fact that the locations that you send these students to are lacking resource, and staff are feeling very burnt out in terms of like the amount of work they're having to do and the expectations on them. So there's a real challenge that we've been faced with, and I'm sure we can overcome it. And as a team, I have all the faith in the world that we can get our students through this experience, but it's just going to take us quite a while to get to the point where we can provide this many hours of real life training. We have got virtual systems in place now where you can set up virtual pharmacies and help them with counseling and kind of problem solving. And one of the other topics that came up in terms of the drive of moving this curriculum forward is looking at behavioral science and actually looking at patient experiences, and not just saying take one tablet a day and then just expecting them to do that, and truly understanding what the patient's life is like, what their environment's like, what their mindset is like, and at what point they're in mentally, in terms of accepting that a medication is what they need to feel better for whatever disease that you're trying to treat. But looking at that person's mindset and helping them to make those decisions on their own, or coming up with the answers that you would expect them to be able to solve their own problems. And they did a little bit of a pilot. And when you look at kind of first and second year pharmacy students, we've got a long way to go. They're very much green in terms of counseling, and it's expected, don't get me wrong, and I'm not putting down first and second year pharmacy students, but it's a case of, yes, it's aspirin, it's 75 milligrams, it comes as one tablet, you have it every morning after food, like that's the basic. But we're trying to drive this system forward that actually patients may turn around and tell you, hey, I don't want to take that, I'm not interested in taking that. So the pharmacy students then have to try and figure out what the reasons are behind that answer, and also sometimes respect that that's the patient's choice. They did a simulation and one of the students was like, well, no, you have to take it. But it's understanding autonomy and the fact that they can reject what you're suggesting and working around that situation. So it's really interesting that we're not in the environment that we used to, where it was very much like streamlined to like know the information you need to give the patient, just kind of provide that information and then just expect that
Yeah.
the patient does everything else.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that this is changing, and I'm excited to see how we can support our students. For me, like counseling and kind of understanding the patient's environment, their quality of life, what works for them, what their challenges are,
Mm.
what obstacles they have in terms of taking something,
Mm.
or even if it's something as simple as they're constipated and you want to advise them to drink more water because they don't, or they have 10 cups of coffee a day,
Mm.
and they're wondering why they're still constipated.
Mm.
You know, opening that mindset and having that conversation and really getting to know them is quite natural for me, and it's something I genuinely enjoy doing. But that's not the case for everyone, and it's going to be really good to see how we're training pharmacy students to change their perception.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other thing is, so I think what you're talking about, and I'm pleased to hear you saying that it is changing, and I can understand how difficult that is, because I know from colleagues that are still in retail pharmacy, they are all struggling to fit everything in terms of the additional kind of work. And my concern is that the workload is such that, and the squeeze on the finances is such that actually you'll see the customer will see less of a pharmacist than rather than more, and the availability of pharmacists on the high street is gonna change. You know, I went into I won't mention names, but went into a multi-chain, large chain pharmacy over the weekend, and the place was packed. The pharmacy downstairs was packed, and there was a queue of people, probably about 20 people long. There was one dispenser and one pharmacist, and you could see that they were completely overwhelmed. And I think, well, okay, I can understand the staffing issue. Obviously, pharmacy salaries are going up, but this is obviously not the way to look after that number of customers coming through. So there's such a lot of pressure on both sides that we have to find another way of funding that. And I think probably, and I've seen a new, a pharmacist chain kind of being developed to look at adding on services to the core pharmacy function of dispensing, some of which are paid. So so whatever it is, the government has to change its attitude towards pharmacy, and pharmacy has to find different ways to create the revenue to support the pharmacist infrastructure, so that the customer there's sufficient resource to deal with the customers. So, but I think that closeness between pharmacists and the customer, being able to have the time to understand what the dynamic is and to adapt the advice, the generic advice accordingly, I think is really important. And generally speaking, we don't have the time at the moment, so we have to make the time. We have to find a way of making that time. And I just wonder as well whether actually the pharmaceutical industry creates the product, but then almost takes a big step back from the customer and leaves it all for the medics and the pharmacists to deal with the queries arising. And actually, where else in industry do companies that provide products do that? Actually, surely you have to have some sort of. I mean, within a pharmaceutical company, there'll be a drug information pharmacist that deals with the hospital queries generally, sometimes from pharmacists, but not often. But maybe they need to be stepping up and creating a team that actually starts to communicate, or provide a resource that can communicate with customers. I don't know. I just throw that out there. But it seems to me that the pharmaceutical industry there's a distance there between they're producing the product, they're researching, developing the product, but actually from a customer point of view, they have very little customer contact. And even the original contact between the pharmaceutical industry and the doctor is sort of disappeared. I mean, it used to be that the rep will go and have a discussion and go through research and stuff. And for what I'm told, that has stopped as well. So there's a bit of an issue there. So I think whatever it is, we just have to come up with ideas that are practical and work. But that interaction between pharmacist and customer is really fundamental. And when I go back into the pharmacy after this, I'll hear Dimple on the phone, chatting away, listening, having time to listen and adapt whatever she's recommending according to the customer. And I think that's gold dust. And I'm really proud that we're providing that service. So that, to me, I wouldn't want to have a robot or a distant service where we're not talking to customers, because that's pharmacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of goes back to the point that you made quite a few minutes ago about, I've completely blanked. Way to go, Anisha, on the podcast live. It's like
Okay.
I've blanked on the conversation.
About customer contact.
It's gone from my brain. No, it was it was a really good point as well. It will come back to me. But let me ask you a question while I think about that. Is that we talked a little bit about recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
And you also mentioned that it's not always about the experience that you come with and what's on your CV, obviously, when you're hiring pharmacists. But what training do you provide that supports your pharmacists to be able to have these very kind of intricate conversations with patients? And like you said, each patient is a very different experience, and you can't just have a one-size-fits-all SOP. How do you support your staff in terms of their development within their roles?
We have a training manual for pharmacists, which we developed, and it's a bit like a softer version of the BNF, and it gives them some framework, because you can't just leave it open. So we create a framework from the research, from the way that it's been formulated, and the dosage regimen that we've set up originally, and some user experience, because sometimes we'll find, for instance, when we first started with Saffron, we were recommending them to take it at night. And then we found that actually it was much better taking in the morning. It was just from user experience. And, my family take all the products that we formulate, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And so we build that in. We have standard operating procedures within the pharmacy for the way to manage customers and the way to record customer interventions. And around that, I will often sit with the pharmacist, because there'll be something that comes in that's unusual or challenging. And, I've got 35 years of experience of dealing with unusual questions, and sometimes it's relating to manufacturing, sometimes it's relating to components. So I'll sit down with them and I'll go through the way that I approach the problem, and then say, well, okay, what do you feel comfortable with? So I don't really necessarily want them to take on my approach. Listen to my advice, listen to my experiences. There may be 2 or 3 cases previously like that or similar, and shape your own response and learn from that. I think that with some of the pharmacists, I can see the different skill mixes as well. So with Dimple, she's really getting into the supply chain side of it. So I'm bringing in quality control, manufacturing, the parameters to review, certificates of analysis for botanicals, what she should be looking out for. So there's a sort of process of development, which was pretty much similar to the process of training that we had at Weleda. At Weleda, we couldn't recruit pharmacists. So we developed a training course over for 6 months, 2 pharmacists every 6 months, and generally we recruited those pharmacists that came out of that. They were salaried on a fairly basic salary, but after that training course, they graduated with a 6 month sort of experience from start to finish of the process, and that was really useful. I use that as a bit of a template for what we're doing here at the Naked Pharmacy. So that Naked Pharmacy was, I'm very grateful to Walida for a lot of the early work they did in terms of transforming the way I work as well.
I love that you've got a little sort of family team there, and it's not a dictatorship, but you're kind of learning from one another, and guiding each other along the way, and developing each other's kind of learning styles and the ways of working, which sounds like a really nice environment. Are you in-house together in the offices every day, or sometimes people are working from home?
Mostly in the office now, post COVID. We were kind of working remotely. I didn't really like that, to be honest. I'm a bit old fashioned. I like the team together. There's a sort of energy and dynamism when you get into a room together. We're starting
Yeah, absolutely.
we're starting to struggle with the space that we've got at the moment. So I think we'll be moving into a bigger pharmacy at some point soon, I think. But it's great. We get on really well. I think we've obviously got customer care, customer service kind of people that are managing as part of the team. So the more kind of non-pharmacy queries, and we all get on really well, and we work together as a team. And sometimes there'll be ideas kind of thrown out into the ring about how to manage things better, because we're growing, we're evolving, and I don't want to be doing things the same way. In a few years' time, even a year's time, I want to be I want to be evolving continuously, and also it's not all about me. I'm 57 and I've got plenty more years in me left, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the team that can take this on, and for this to be something that's got longevity. I want to.
Absolutely. And you talked a lot about being open-minded and the flexibility, in terms of your mindset with the job. So, you know, you're fitting in with your own values,
I hope
which is great.
so. I try to.
Mm.
Yeah.
I remembered my point, by the way.
Oh, well done.
It came back to me. I knew it would. So you talked a little bit about pharmacy and how we need to be more open-minded in terms of problem solving and thinking about what issues there are and trying to pave the way forward. And I was going to say that actually there are some really exciting things that are happening in silos sometimes. But when it comes to counseling and looking at medications, and you talked a little bit about the pressures of the community pharmacist and not having time necessarily to have those one-on-one conversations. I recently found out, which I wasn't aware of, that the NHS have QR codes which are put onto medication boxes. The patient scans the QR code and it brings up a video on their phone, for example, explaining what that medication is and all the counseling points needed to take that medication
Wow.
in multiple different languages. And that's really exciting because pharmacists are getting involved in what's actually being recorded into those videos and the information that's being provided to the patient, which they can then listen to multiple times over and over again if they haven't understood it the first time. And they're not in a busy pharmacy environment where, of course, it would be ideal if they got the information as they collected the medication, but sometimes there is a lot of distraction where you feel rushed to kind of get your counseling because there's someone behind you who's also waiting for their medicines.
Mhm.
And the pharmacist also feels slightly rushed to provide as much information they can in a speedy way and get you out the door so the next customer can be dealt with.
That's a great
Um,
idea.
Yeah, like it's an amazing idea. And I was really excited because I work in pediatrics in palliative care. And when these patients are going home with multiple medications, which they could potentially use, and the parents don't necessarily use it immediately on discharge, but maybe if their child deteriorates after a month, they've of course forgotten everything I've told them in the hospital environment. And actually having these QR codes sounds like a brilliant idea for me to showcase what we can advise parents in terms of giving a medication, and even looking at a route of administration, like if it's a buccal medication, explaining how do you give a buccal
Mm.
medicine to a baby,
Mm. Wow.
multiple weeks down the line. So I was really excited that there are projects going on in pharmacy that you wouldn't even think about doing when you're in your university degree.
Mm.
These kind of ideas don't just kind of pop up in conversation when you're studying in your day-to-day undergraduate degree.
Mm.
Another exciting thing is I've obviously set up this podcast, and it's a passion project of mine. I'm all into the videography and the quality of the video and the sound and everything else. And everything that's come out of this project, I'm now utilizing some of that knowledge and experience in my day-to-day work, which
Mm.
is so cool.
Yeah.
So it's really important to just say to students, to young pharmacists, or any pharmacist out there, that be creative, be innovative, like use like everything digital to your advantage. And if you've got an idea,
Mm.
never feel fearful to try and make it a reality.
Absolutely. Don't be scared to try something. If it doesn't work, there'll always be something that comes out of that failure, which is useful. And I think that this fear that there is there to not trying something new, not stepping forward. Well, why don't we give this a go and see if it works? I mean that QR code. So who's producing the QR codes and the videos? Is it the NHS, or is it their companies, or who's doing that?
I'm not sure who's exactly producing the QR code, but it is definitely linked with an NHS initiative. I'll send you the link
Yeah,
outside of
yeah,
this, and I'll put
I'm
it in the show
interested.
notes for the podcast episode in case anyone else is interested, because
Mhm.
it's something I really want to look into
Mhm.
in terms of the work that I'm doing in the hospital. Before we kind of close out our conversation, tell everybody how you can, or how they can get in touch with you or with the Naked Pharmacy.
Yes, we're online, thenakedpharmacy.com. We have a team of pharmacists, so you can email the pharmacist at thenakedpharmacy.com. If you look on social media, we're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, so you can contact us through those means. We're also on YouTube. So we'll put a link on YouTube to this podcast. That's always useful. And if not, you can find us on the phone, so you can call us. I think the phone number is on 01483 685 630. So I do still remember it. And so the contact us page will have all the details on there. As I said, there's a team of 4 pharmacists, so occasionally you might get me. And whether you're a pharmacist or a member of the public, we're happy to hear from you, advise. If there's a pharmacist that needs interested in some career advice, whatever, then I'm happy to help support, because I know how difficult it is. I think you go through various phases of your career, and it's really difficult to kind of shape something that's right for you. And I think these podcasts, well done for getting this set up, and the advice coming out of it, I think, is really, really innovative and transforming. So, don't be scared. There's plenty of opportunity out there for pharmacists. So please don't leave the profession. Just find something that works for you. And as you say, that gives me heart, what you said about the QR codes, that there is evolution happening that's important. I think we just need to perhaps do it faster. And I think that from a government perspective, from a licensing perspective, I think we just need to keep all the opportunities on the table, and the doors open for good evidence-based, properly manufactured and researched products, so that they can do what they're meant to do, which is make a difference to people's health and lives. So fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for making time for me today. And I really look forward to hearing more about Naked Pharmacy for the future.
Brilliant. I'll come back in a year's time and we'll talk about it again.